want to just thank the yeshiva and the Rosh Yeshiva for choosing Modi'in to establish your yeshiva here. I think it's a tremendous schus for us, and I'm speaking as the representative of the residents of Modi'in, the only layperson speaking, that to express our gratitude from the city, from the residents, and particularly from the English speakers here, that we have you in our midst. And we hope to enjoy a long relationship with you. And it's specifically for programs like this, which I think are somewhat lacking in Modi'in, a program where people can connect to a holiday like Yom Iyun, which is sometimes difficult for us coming from Chutz La'aretz to connect to, and to establish a Yom Iyun like this in a day of Torah about Inyanei Eretz Yisrael is a great idea, and I look forward to many more ideas that you have like this in the future. In particular, the problem of people from Chutz La'aretz relating to Yom Ha'atzmaut is that growing up in communities in America and England, Yom Ha'atzmaut was a little bit awkward for us. We all loved Israel, but we recognized we didn't live in Israel. So what was Yom Ha'atzmaut? Was it just a day where they, in school they would serve falafel and you'd have some Israeli music, and it was very difficult to connect to, and especially since so much of the Torah leadership in I'll just speak for America is kind of wishy-washy about their Zionism. It's difficult for someone to find meaning in Yom Ha'atzmaut. I mean, particularly in institutions like YU, where people they're looking up to the Rabbeim, and those Rabbeim are not coming to the Yom Ha'atzmaut celebration, and then you kind of ask, where do they stand on this? And you're just very conflicted. And I think one of the things that you do accomplish as a religious person moving to Israel is you gain somewhat clarity on what your relationship is to Israel, and specifically what your religious relationship is to Israel. But even coming here, and even amongst the people that live here already, there is a little bit of confusion on how they view Yom Ha'atzmaut. I mean, here in this city we have a whole secular celebration of Yom Ha'atzmaut, with a concert in the middle of town and fireworks, and that would give somebody the idea that Yom Ha'atzmaut is like the 4th of July, Independence Day, and you celebrate it the way it's celebrated in America. The religious community tries to give religious significance to the day, but there's still always this conflict of what kind of day is it? Is it a day like Hanukkah and Purim? Is it a yontif, or is it a secular holiday? So I wanted to address these at least two perspectives within religious Zionism on how to view the day of Yom Ha'atzmaut. So just one of the benefits of being the last speaker is I can have the last word, and from the other two speakers. The only thing I would mention, I wanted to mention, is that in the machlokas as presented by the Rosh Yeshiva, the Rambam and the Ramban, on whether Yishuv Haaretz is a mitzvah or not, I've heard that many have answered for the Rambam that the Rambam indeed does view Yishuv Haaretz as a mitzvah. Why didn't he list it? And he didn't. Thank you. He didn't list it, possibly because it's not really a specific mitzvah, but an overarching concept that includes all the mitzvahs in the Torah, that all our mitzvahs are really elevated by living here in Israel, and the Rambam's only listing specific mitzvahs and not overarching mitzvahs. I think there are other answers that are given, but I would raise the possibility that maybe the Rambam also agrees that living in Israel is a mitzvah.
Next year you're going to speak first.
And then the other thing I wanted to do is to what Rabbi Ginsburg said. We started the shiur with a conversation or actually a shiur that Rabbi Soloveitchik addressed, and he said that the fact that Kissinger can demand that the prime minister come on one day rather than another day shows that Israel isn't really sovereign. I guess I would agree with that, but I would suggest an article that Rav Migdal from HaAtzmaut wrote a couple of weeks ago in a newspaper, saying that the waning power of the United States of America in these times and the growing power of, or currently the vacuum of power that's been created by that, is an opportunity for Israel to gain more sovereignty and actually elevate its role in the world as it frees itself from being subject to the United States of America. So maybe we're going to be looking forward to a new era in that sense. Anyway, back to my topic. So I want to present two possibilities of perspectives on religious Zionism and on Yom HaAtzmaut within religious Zionism. One is that Yom HaAtzmaut represents a great miracle, and that we're simply giving thanks to Hashem for the great miracle that occurred. The miracle of that's twofold, really. That this is actually presented very beautifully by the Tshuvas Kol Mevaser by Menachem Roth, I think Rabbi Shulam Roth, who was on the first Moetzet Hadatit at the founding of the State of Israel, where he's asked, can we say Hallel with a bracha on Yom HaAtzmaut? And he writes a tshuva, classic halach tshuva on this topic. I'm not going to get into the topic of Hallel with a bracha, without a bracha, but he says that basically we're celebrating Yom HaAtzmaut for two reasons. Number one is that we were saved, we were physically saved. That not only were the Haganah and the people fighting, or the residents of Israel, saved, but rather the entire Jewish people was saved because we had nowhere to go after the Holocaust. There was literally nowhere to go, and the establishment of the State of Israel and the winning of the war allowed Israel to open up its gates and the immigrants to come in, and there was a physical Yeshua. And then there's also an element of Me'abdus L'Cheirus. The quintessential Hallel is a Hallel that we say on Pesach, which is where we celebrate Me'abdus L'Cheirus. And establishing a sovereign state in Israel is really going from slavery, from being subject to every other nation, to establishing an independent nation. And that's why he thinks, and he based this on a tshuva of the Maharam al-Shakar and also the Chasam Sofer, who writes that any community has a right to establish a yontif for themselves. If they were saved from a calamity, from a war, or from a fire, or anything, they can establish a yontif for themselves. And he's dealing with the possibility of why shouldn't establishing a new Chag of Yom HaAtzmaut be considered Bal Tosif? Because the Ramban, at least, on the mitzvah of Bal Tosif, he says that very specifically, Lefi dati, afilu badal lasot mitzvah b'fnei atzma, kagon shasa chag b'chodesh b'chadash shebada milibo. And like Yeravam established a new chag. He wanted to take the people away from Yerushalayim and establish a different holiday to take them away. Any kind of making of a new chag would be considered a problem of Bal Tosif. So we're going to have to deal with that. But the Kol Mevaser says there is no problem of Bal Tosif. Why is there no problem of Bal Tosif? Because if you look at the framework of when we're allowed to say Hallel, the Gemara in Pesachim Daf Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph says that when is Hallel said? The example of Hallel is Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mashmuel, Shiur HaTorah, and shiur he's relating to Hallel. Moshe v'Yisrael Amruhu v'Shasha Alu Min Hayam. The Hallel Zeh Mi Amru Neviim Shabineim Tiknu Lehem Yisrael Shu Omrim Mosar Kol Perak Uperak V'Al Kol Tzara V'Tzara Shelo Tavo Alehen Likashinigalin Omrim Mosar Gulasan. That the time when you say Hallel is any time you're saved from a life-threatening from a threat of life, like Bnei Yisrael being saved at Yam Suf. They said Hallel. So that's one source that he relies on. The other source that he relies on is the Gemara in Erchin Daf Yud Amud Aleph, where the Gemara lists that all the times when you say Hallel. The Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yotzadak Shmona Asar Yamim Shayachid Gomer Behenes Hallel. There are 18 times, and it goes on and lists all the days. Shmona Shemei Chanukah, Yom Tov Rishon Shel Pesach, all the Yomim Tovim, and establish a guideline. When do you say Hallel? Either when there is a yontif of where there's Issur Malacha, or when you're saved from an ace. right? Because there is no Issur Malach on Hanukkah. Why do we say Hallel on Hanukkah? Because of the Nes. Just like they said Hallel, as the Gemara Pesachim shows, when they were saved, Bnei Yisrael was saved from Yam Suf. So too, on any Nes that happens where there's a threat to life, and we're saved, we're required to say Hallel. And therefore, the Chuvas Kol Mavasar concludes that and just read you his language, that Ein Safek Shayom Ahu Shenitpa Yidei HaMemshala V'Chavei HaKnesset. And this was somebody actually who was a Rav in Romania before he ran away from the Nazis and came in and was asked to join the first Moatzah Datit. Writes that Ein Safek. He says, Rov Gedolei Rabbanim Lachug Oto. They all wanted to. All the Rov Rabbanim wanted to celebrate this day. B'chol Haaretz Zeichel Hanes Al Tshuaseinu V'Cheirusenu, meaning being saved and also our independence. Mitzvah Lasoso Simcha V'Yom Tov V'Lo Mahalel. It's a mitzvah to make a Yom Tov out of this, and he relies, like I said, on the Chasam Sofer, that any community can make a Yom Tov when they're saved from a calamity. And at the Yeshkan, he says here, Pidyon mi'abdus lecherus, as I said, independence. Shenigalenu mishibun malchios, v'naseinu b'nei chorin, v'sadnu HaAtzmaut mamlaktit. Right, as we mentioned, sovereignty, that's sovereign, Atzmaut mamlaktit. V'gam hatzalam v'nita l'chaim, and also our lives were saved. Shenitzalnu midei oivenu, she'amdu aleinu l'chalosenu, v'vadai chov aleinu lepo yom tov. And then he says, but at the end, so he builds this whole thing up. He says, there's no problem about Tosif. Why is there no problem about Tosif? He says, because you had both these things. You have Hatzalah and Misa L'chaim, V'gam Abdus L'cherus, and therefore relying on the Chasam Sofer and on the Shuvas Mar Shakir, there's no problem about Tosif. However, there's a big question here. And this question is asked by Rav Hershel Schachter in his Sefer Bikvei Hatzon, that's true, that any community can establish a Yom Tov when they're saved from the calamity. But can you establish a holiday for all of Klal Yisrael? Can you institute a Purim or a Hanukkah for the entire Klal Yisrael just based on being saved from a calamity? You can't do that. You can only do that for a specific... The Chasam Sofer and the Ma'ar Mashakar are talking about a specific calamity that threatened a particular group of people, but not to establish a chag for all Klal Yisrael. And therefore, there's a problem there, and I'm going to address this problem. But in any event, the Chuvas Kol Mavasar he concludes in a little bit of a disappointment, and he says, Al kol panim yotza lanu midina b'nidon didan de'en kan shum chashash u'pikpuk klal mishum Bal Tosif. There's no problem with Tosif. Rak adraba, chivu mitzvah laso zeichel hanes, v'lekboat yom ha'atzmaut yom tov v'simcha, v'lomar bo halal shalem below dilu, meaning not half halal, as we say on Rosh Chodesh or Chol Hamoed Pesach, but a full halal. But he says at the end, mikol makom l'maisa lekboa halacha l'doros b'inyan birchas halal, to actually make a bracha on halal, who davar mechudash achrei atkufa ruka shel 2,000 shana. No one's ever done this in 2,000 years. Even though he thinks he's right, and you can make a bracha on halal, he says, he's not willing to make this, to go out on a limb and say, you have to make a bracha on halal without the agreement of all the Gedolei HaRabbanim, and that's how he ends the tshuva. Basically saying that, in theory, you should say halal and make a bracha and establish a Yom Tov, but he's not willing to do this because he doesn't have the agreement of everyone. And in the wake of this, Rav Ovadia Yosef wrote a tshuva where he recognizes the Nes Gadol, and it was an incredible Nes that we were saved from, both from Abdus L'Cheirus and also Mimita L'Chayim. However, he doesn't want to make a bracha on halal either, because he says that it's not clear, even though he mentions that most of the Rabbanim at that time, and this is a document that actually my brother-in-law, Rabbi Goldberg, who's the rabbi of Boca Raton Synagogue, I saw this document from him for the first time, is an actual a statement by Rov Rabbanim that would be considered Charedim. I was looking for it, I couldn't find it, signed a declaration declaring that the establishment of the State of Israel is officially the Aschalta de Geula. Rav Ovadia recognizes that document. But he says that in practice we don't see it happening. There's so many non-religious people in the world, and the government does so many things that are against religious values, and it's just there's also a physical threat he recognizes, and therefore he's not willing to declare the state of Israel as definitely the Askalta de Geula, the premonition of redemption, and concludes that one should say Hallel without a bracha. And I think that this view, even though the Rabbanut certainly has instructed us to say Hallel with a bracha, and all communities in Modi'in do that, the view of Yom HaAtzmaut being celebrated to recognize a miracle of both independence and of physical safety, Mimisa l'chaim, is probably the predominant view that's held by the religious Zionist population in Israel.
I think so. The first decision in 48 or 49 to say Hallel, it didn't mention Bahanat. After 6 Day War, Yom Iyun, they said specific with bracha.
Oh, okay.
That was the difference. Because at the beginning, it didn't say with bracha. They said you must say Hallel.
Right. Rav Chaim Dovrat pointing this out, along this resident of Modi'in and one of the Rabbanim here in the city, and we had the pleasure of learning the daf together for many years. Thank you for that. But it's that may be true, but I think, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, I think that most of the religious Zionist population is celebrating Yom HaAtzmaut, even from the religious standpoint, as recognizing the big miracle that happened. And yet we have to give thanks to Hashem for this big miracle. But that opens us up to this kasha that Rav Hershel Schachter poses, which is why isn't this a problem of Bal Tosif? You can do that for a specific community. But and Rav Vajra also points this out. He doesn't think, although many differ with him, he doesn't think that the Independence War was a miracle on all of Klal Yisrael. It was a miracle for the people that were living here. I think that, in my humble opinion, that doesn't make sense, and I think many Rabbanim disagree with that it really was a miracle for all of Klal Yisrael, because without a state of Israel, people would be in DP camps and they'd have nowhere to go. So it really was a miracle for all of Klal Yisrael. But in any event, and that poses the question: how can you establish Yom HaAtzmaut? So Rav Schachter answers the question by presenting a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, which talks about a sefer called the Megillat Ta'anit. Megillat Ta'anit was a very, very old sefer written by Tanaim, and it lists in that sefer a plethora of Yamim Tovim that were established during the Bayis Sheni. And there were so many of them. We weren't allowed to say Tachanan. You couldn't make a hesped. You couldn't fast on those days. And the Gemara has a discussion in Rosh Hashanah about whether after the Chorban Bayis Sheni, whether these holidays have any significance. There's also the idea that all these holidays had something to do with dedicating the Beis HaMikdash, either improving the Beis HaMikdash, fixing something in the Beis HaMikdash, renewing korbanos that had stopped in the Beis HaMikdash, providing enough wood for the fire on the Mizbeach in the Beis HaMikdash. They all had something to do with it. And the question was asked, what do we do after the Korban Bayis Sheni? Now, interestingly enough, there are two holidays we're also including in this Megillas Taanis, were Hanukkah and Purim. They were rabbinically ordained holidays, and the question is, what should we do with them after the Korban Bayis Sheni? So the Gemara says in Rosh Hashanah, Itmar Rav Rab Chanina, Amrei Batla Megillas Taanis, Rab Yochanan Rab Shua Levi Amrei Lo Batla Megillas Taanis. There's a question: is it become nullified or not? Rav Rab Chanina Amrei Batla Megillas Taanis, Haki Kamar Bisman Shiyei Shalom. Yula Sasan L'Simcha. Ein Shalom Tzom. V'hanach Nani Kihani, meaning addressing the fast days. What about the fast days of, let's say, Asar B'Tevis, Shavasa B'Tammuz? What did they do during those fast days during the second temple? They had a temple. So they weren't celebrating, they weren't commemorating, they weren't fasting on those days. They were actually rejoicing on those days. As the Navi said, Yubel L'Sasan L'Simcha. So now on the flip side, the days that, not fast days, the days that we celebrated during the Bayis Sheni for improving the Beis Hamikdash, what should be done after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed? And the Gemara concludes that that the Hilchasa Batlu, that they're nullified, the Hilchasa Lo Batlu. What do you mean? They were nullified, they weren't nullified. So it says, Gemara says, Kasha Hilchasa al Hilchasa. It doesn't make sense. There's a stira. So the Gemara answers, Lo Kasha Kan B'Chanukah Purim Kan B'Shar Yomi. Meaning every holiday that was listed in the Migdal Tainus is indeed nullified, except for Chanukah and Purim. Why not? Why did Chanukah and Purim remain? The Gemara says, the Talinu Rachmana B'Binyan Beis Hamikdash. All these holidays had to do with Binyan Beis Hamikdash, but obviously Chanukah and Purim had something that was Me'al Me'aver, something more significant involving the Beis Hamikdash than all the other holidays. And the question is, what was that? So, and this is what I want to address now. The point that we're addressing now is, in order to say that Yom HaAtzmaut can be celebrated and has to be celebrated, and there is no issue of Bal Tosif, is because it fits into the parameters of the Megillas Tainus, and fits in not only to the parameters of Megillas Tainus because it was nullified, but fits into the parameters of Purim and Chanukah that make Purim and Chanukah holidays that are everlasting, that will last forever. Yom HaAtzmaut has to fit into that category, and Rav Schechter explains how it does in fact fit into that category. How does it fit in that category? We believe, as a tenet of religious Zionism, that the establishment of the State of Israel has to be the Aschalta de Geula. It has to be a path that will lead us eventually to Binyan Beis Hamikdash HaShlishi. It has to lead to that. And true, there can be steps back, and it may take a long time. The road may be long, but eventually we're on that path. And that's exactly why we're celebrating Yom HaAtzmaut, because it is a link in that chain. It's the first step in leading up to the Binyan Beis Hamikdash, which this connects directly to the Ramban that the Rosh Hashiva brought up, and Rabbi Ginsburg also brought up in Ramban in the Hasagos to the Minyan HaEsin, that he after the Rambam's list of Sefer Mitzvahs, the Ramban says he left this one out, he left that one out, and the one he left out was this mitzvah of not only living in Eretz Yisrael, but also conquering Eretz Yisrael, establishing sovereignty in the land of Israel, which he thinks is a fundamental mitzvah. And that's also a link in the road towards the rebuilding of the third temple. Now, how is that so? We're told that the Gemara that there are three things that have to happen when we go into Eretz Yisrael. What are the three things? Anybody know?
King.
Road.
Yeah.
Road Klal Yisrael.
Amalek.
Ah, okay. So it's here. It's
And building the Beit HaMikdash.
right. The Chachar in Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Chaf on the Beis. The Chachar Yehuda Omer Gimel Mitzvos Nistabu Yisrael B'Knisasan La'aretz Lahami Lahem Melech, which we're going to show doesn't have to be a king. It's a government. Lahachri Zaro Shal Amalek, to destroy Amalek, meaning destroy your enemies. Rabbi Ginsburg pointed out is something that's definitely lacking in our state of sovereignty now. The Livnos Lahem Beis HaBechira. What comes first? What's the order? Kishu Omer Kiyad al Keis Kam Milchama Lashem Ba'amalek Havi Omer La'amid Lahem Melech Tchila. Right? That the Kisei V'ein Kisei El Melech, you have to have a Kisei of Melech, and then destroy Amalek. Right? But then what about Beis HaBechira? So the Gemara concludes that the order is like this: you establish a Melech, or sovereignty, a government, a Jewish government in Israel. You destroy Amalek, you destroy your enemies, you conquer the land by destroying your enemies, and then you build the Beis Hamikdash. So now we see, what is Yom HaAtzmaut? Yom HaAtzmaut is establishing sovereignty, the first condition in the necessary chain of events that has to lead up to the third Beis Hamikdash, establishing sovereignty in Israel. Then, that gives us a responsibility. We need to destroy our enemies. Now the army Tzahal doesn't only take the role of protecting the residents of Israel. It also takes the role of conquering the land of Israel. The Tzahal has a mandate to conquer, definitely according to the Ramban, of conquering the land of Israel, which will then lead up to the peace and building the third Beis Hamikdash. Now, the question then is asked, how do we know that this is it? How do we know that, fine, you can establish a state of Israel, sovereignty, right? But then maybe, chas v'sholom, we can get kicked out of here again. And the whole thing will have to start all over again and go back to Europe and Spain and do the whole thing over again, come back in another few thousand years, chas v'sholom. How do we know that that's not what the story here? So we know that's not the story, because the Ramban in Parshas Bahar explains that we have two tochachos in the Torah. We have the one in Bichul Kosai, and we have the one in Kitavo at the end of Dvarim. Kitavo. And the Ramban explains that's very simple. The first tochacha applies to the exile from when the destruction of the Bayis Rishon, and the second tochacha in Kisavo applies to the second the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash. And he says that we're promised that there will not be another exile after that, and explains that explains how it fits in with the words Aval Habrish Sheb'Mishnah Torah Yirmoz Legalosenu Zeh V'Legula Shenigal Mimenu. The one, and afterwards, after every tocha, then there's the promise that I won't forget you and I'll bring you back and I'll make you my nation again. That promise at the end of Kisavo applies to what we're living in right now, at least the very start of it. We still have a long way to go, but that we're living that end of Parshas Kisavo, the Nechama, the Psukim of the Nechama that come after that tochacha. Because we don't find another tochacha in the Torah, and that's all there is. Right? Geula bebris sahi ashenis geula shlema meula al kulam. That geula that we're living in right now is the ultimate. We haven't gotten to the ultimate geula, but it's step by step. We're now in the first parts of it. So by celebrating Yom HaAtzmaut, you're celebrating the Chag of Aschalta de Geula. The first step. Now, how do I know that you can make a holiday for Aschalta de Geula, or how does this Rav Shefter makes this point in his Sefer Beit Vayatzon? Is that there's a model for it already. We celebrated, Klal Yisrael celebrated holidays that were an Aschalta de Geula, even to the extent that we nullified Yom Kippur. I mean, no one's saying that Yom HaAtzmaut should nullify Shabbos or any Issur D'Oraisa, but there is a model for it at least, and that model is the Chag that we made in the Yimei Miluim when we consecrated the Mishkan, and then when Shlomo HaMelech consecrated the first Beis Hamikdash, they in Sukkot, and they started earlier. They ate on Yom Kippur even. They ate on Yom Kippur because now that was only the Bayis Rishon. That wasn't the ultimate redemption. And the Nevi'im knew that it wasn't going to be the ultimate redemption, but nevertheless they established that as a yontif. So at the very least, the celebrating of the first step in the Aschalta de Geula has a model of making a chag and a yontif for that. I think that that this is very important to understand as religious Zionists living in Israel, that we can't just view Israel as a nice place to live, or even a place that we're so thankful for because Hashem did so many nisim and for us. But we have to view it as a first step in a long road. And anyone who moves here from Chutz La'aretz is playing a part in that history. Is joining the train on this path. It gives us a charge, as not only when we go to work every day and we pay taxes and we pay parking tickets. What an incredible schus to pay a parking ticket where your money is going to things that people give tzedakah for from Eretz Yisrael. When you're angry, you get a parking ticket. Where is it? You get a parking ticket in Yerushalayim. It's going to Iriyat Yerushalayim. What are they doing with that money? They're building roads and I don't know, the water system, electricity, whatever they do with the taxes. Everything we do is playing a part in that role, in that in the path leading to the ultimate Geula. And I think that it's very important to mention, to keep that close to our hearts. I'll just close with with something that has to do with this time of the year. It's not, the Gra had all kinds of calculations. My son Micha will tell you about them, where he actually, way before his time, calculated the significance of the day of HaIyar, of Yom HaAtzmaut, and the day of Yom Yerushalayim, that these were going to be significant days in the ultimate redemption of our people. And and these days fall out dafka during the time of Shiur Omer. What's Shiur Omer? Besides the customs of Avelis that we have, we're going from a korban that we brought on the second day of Pesach, which Chazal, the korban HaOmer, right? Which they call a korban HaOmer, even though an Omer is really the same as an Isaron. It's the same measurement. For some reason, Chazal wanted to call it an Omer. An Omer gives the Or Chaim HaKadosh points this out. It gives the connotation of the actual process of collecting it, Amer, to collect the grain to bring the korban HaOmer. And if you read the description in the Gemara goes through every single step. And they made a big deal about every single step. They brought the Beis Din down to the field where they had put aside for the Korban Omer. And they said, should we cut this wheat? We should cut it. Should we cut it with this sieve? With this sieve we should cut it. Every single thing, they made a big deal out of it. Why did they make a big deal out of it? It's also significant that when is in the Torah, when the Torah says we can't eat chadash, we can't eat, the purpose of the korban haomer and the shtei alechem is to allow us to eat the new wheat. Before that, we can't eat the wheat. Only after they brought the korban on Shavuos, we can eat the new wheat. What was significant of that? The man that we ate in the Torah. Also, the Torah says we collected an omer, the same term, even though they could have used isaron. He used the term omer. Why an omer? The transition of the people in the Midbar, going from the Midbar, the Torah, the Psukim say in Yoshua that there was one day, on the second day, they went from eating the man, and the very next day there was no man, and they had to eat from the produce of the land. It's significant that Yom HaAtzmaut falls out during this time, because we're going from a period of time of Galus, where we lived in Galus, and we were basically at the mercy of Hashem to take care of us, and He did take care of us, despite calamities that happened to us. In the end, as a nation at least, we were saved. But we're going to a transition of now we have to do things on our own. Just like the Bnei Yisrael had to do when they came to land in the time of Yoshua, we have to do things on our own. We have to play a part in it. Our very going to work, our paying taxes, our everyday life is all a part of this mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, sovereignty in Eretz Yisrael, and being a part in a foundation step to the ultimate Geula. Thank you very much.